Hello everyone, Michigan Railfan 57 here. About a month ago, the remnants of smoke from Canadian wildfires were back once again, causing a fog-like haze to cover Michigan and other states close to Canada. This made the air quality rather poor, and even on one day, I remember being able to smell the smoke in the air. However, if you know anything about me, wildfire smoke won't keep me from watching trains. I of course still railfanned when I could despite the less than ideal air quality, and caught some interesting catches that I think you'll enjoy. With that out of the way, let's begin. The first day I railfanned during this event was June 6th, 2025, and out of the 3 days I railfanned during this event, today was definitely the worst. Just look at how hazy it is. Anyways, I was out for L311, which lately had been running with CSX SD40-2 at 8060. This unit had been here for a few weeks by now, and I caught it a few times before. Considering last year I saw almost no SD40-2s on the Saginaw sub, I very much appreciate that this classic standard cab was working here. As usual, L311 had no cars today and was just a light engine move back to Wayne for the evening. The next day, the smoke had lifted a bit, and I happened to hear on my scanner that M511 was nearby. Sure enough, I went out and found headlights in the distance. Today's M511 featured an older CM44 rebuild on the point and a Tier 4 GEVO as a mid-DPU. Later in the day, I heard on my scanner that M566 was in Plymouth. M566 is a relatively new train on the Saginaw Subdivision, running from Detroit, Michigan to Buffalo, New York, and often has a solo leader and a pretty short consist. However, before M566 arrived, I was jump scared by some random northbound grain train, which I believe was G806, an as-needed empty grain train from North Carolina bound for Wixom. Today's G806 had a DC GEVO on the point sporting a hybrid K5HA horn and a YN2 trailing. Not a bad lash up if I do say so myself. Once G806 cleared, M566's headlights appeared on the slower and lesser used Main 2, and it soon arrived. Following its usual pattern, today's M566 had a solo YN3C AC44 on the point, sporting an interesting K5HL. A few hours went by, and soon I-151 made its way through Plymouth. I was hoping this train had a YN2 AC44 on the point, but instead it had CSX 163, a YN3C AC44 that sports a beautiful narrow font K5LA. Take a listen. You might have noticed that I-151 was on Main 2 and not Main 1, hence it's slower than normal speed. I had suspicions about this train being on Main 2, and once it stopped a few hundred feet beyond the crossing, they were proven correct by the signal aspect. I-151 was waiting for another train. The last time I recall this happening was when I got trapped and saw the C&O Heritage unit, so I stayed outside for almost an hour waiting for this northbound. Finally, I saw headlights and this train made its way up to me, which happened to be CSX M510, a manifest from Louisville, Kentucky heading up to Detroit, a train that I've seen several times before and have fond memories of. Yeah, I wasted an hour in the hot sun using my valuable Saturday free time for a duo of Gevos. There goes an hour of my life I'll never get back. At least this is on a manifest and not something like I-150. After he cleared, I went back home for several hours until I thought I heard I-132 on my scanner, a northbound intermodal running from Salem, Illinois to Detroit, Michigan that often features Union Pacific power. However, this train doesn't usually go up the Saginaw Sub and instead takes the Lincoln Secondary at Carlton. According to the call-out, he was clear of John Hicks Road, which in layman's terms is too close. I booked it to the tracks, expecting to see a UP lash-up, but was instead greeted to this. So yeah, I wasted my energy for the most average light power move in existence. This was CSX M225, a northbound autorack train running from Newcastle, Pennsylvania to Detroit, Michigan. It works near Boston and Wayne, often dropping all of its autoracks there, heading light to Detroit the rest of the way. A few hours later, I heard on the scanner that L310 was asking for clearance out of North Yard in Plymouth. L310 is an evening local that originates in North Yard and then heads south to the Romulus area to work various industries. I knew exactly what L310 would have that evening, GP40-3 6501, which had been running it and L315 for months by now, so I didn't really want to go see it, until I heard the dispatcher tell them that they were sending them onto Main 2 so that L313 could pass. L313 is the northbound Lake State Railway manifest that runs from Walbridge, Ohio to Wixom, Michigan, and almost always has a Lake State Railway SD70M trailing. I hadn't seen L313 in a while, so I decided to go out for it. The first train that showed up was L310 meandering down Main 2. Shortly after L310 cleared, L313's headlights appeared on the horizon and shortly made his way up the grade towards me. Sadly, nothing special about today's L313. Now for the final day of this Smoky weekend, Sunday, June 8th. The smoke had returned, although not as bad as it was on Friday. I was out once again for I-151, as I didn't see I-150 yesterday and had no idea what the power was. It turned out to have CSX 7000, the first CM44 rebuild, leading, and a Tier 4 GEVO behind it. Later in the day, I heard on my schooner that L315 was looking to head south with 13 cars for Wayne. L315 is another local out of North Yard in Plymouth, and usually runs east to the Livonia area to work industries around there, but also runs south to industries around Wayne. However, instead of having 6501 like it almost always does, L315 happened to have L311's power, which was SD40-2 8060. I had never seen this happen before, and to this day I am still curious as to why they did this. I was excited and immediately went out, because just like any other stereotypical foamer, the SD40-2 is my favorite diesel locomotive. This was the second time this year I saw an SD40-2 pulling freight on the Saginaw sub, and I think they look much better with a consist than running light engine. Finally, a few hours later, I went out for my last train of the weekend. I was out for L310, surprisingly, thinking it was going to have 8060 because it was on L315. Unfortunately, however, 6501 returned, and as per usual, L310 wasted no time heading to the Romulus area. While this weekend wasn't exactly crazy, it still consisted of some neat catches, surprises, and L's. Everything that I think a good railfanning video needs. It was interesting to see some of these trains in the hazy wildfire smoke from Canada, and I am sure it'll come back again sometime this summer. Thank you all for watching. This is Michigan Railfan 57 signing off. Have a great day.